You're listening to Holy Health, the podcast that brings you the latest in health ideas and technology across the spectrum of fields. While ultimately our fate is up to God, how we get there is determined by us. As it says in Kohelet, there is nothing new under the sun. We get that everything can be found in Torah. Our goal is to empower you with knowledge that may help you make better lifestyle choices. This podcast has been brought to you by Musach Haguf Physical Therapy and Personal Training Studio. Our motto is fixing the past in order to build the future. You can find us on Instagram at Musach Haguf. Hey everyone, welcome back to another week here on the Holy Health Podcast. This week, I'm really excited to interview two people. Well, really, the main interview was with Dr. Connie McReynolds. She generously gave me her time months ago. I think it might have been last winter already. And as you guys know, it's just taken a little while for us to get back on track. So this episode is coming out now after I was excited to pair her episode with Avigayil Gimpel, who is sort of a neighbor of mine. She lives down the street in Avigayil. And she is also, many of you have heard of her. She is also an expert in the field of ADHD. And she really tied this episode beautifully into Torah. And though the title of this episode really is more dealing with ADHD, Dr. McReynolds also deals with PTSD, and Avigayil also talks about trauma and how those types of things can also exhibit as symptoms that look like ADHD. And I hope you guys will bear with me. The very beginning of the interview with Dr. McReynolds, I had a little bit of internet problems. I know you would think it's like we live in a third world country instead of a country leading the world in technology, but there were a little bit of issues in my office. They straightened out pretty quickly, but I decided I would cut off the bio that I typically read at the beginning of the episode in favor of reading it for you guys here where it would be a little more clear. So I just want to introduce Dr. Connie McReynolds. She's a licensed psychologist and certified rehabilitation counselor with more than 30 years of experience in the field of rehabilitation counseling and psychology. She's the founder of Neurofeedback clinics in Southern California, working with children and adults to reduce or eliminate conditions of ADHD, anxiety, anger, depression, chronic pain, learning problems, and trauma. She's a seasoned and inspiring speaker and the author of the award-winning and Amazon #1 best-selling book in 8 categories, Solving the ADHD Riddle. Dr. Connie's wholehearted mission is to bring hope and resolution to those who are struggling with the symptoms of ADHD, their parents, and their teachers. She earned her PhD in rehabilitation psychology at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, gaining valuable experiences in the outpatient substance abuse treatment program at the Middleton, Virginia Hospital, at the Physical Medicine and Rehabilitation Neuropsychological Clinic at Meriter Hospital, and the Mendota Mental Health Institute. So I hope you guys will enjoy this episode. And before we go on, I would just like to promote something that I'm trying to do. So some of you may know that I have started treating a number of soldiers from here in Israel who were either injured or suffering from various orthopedic injuries due to the war, and some of them really cannot afford to pay for treatment on their own. And as much as I would love to just give everybody free treatment, I have a special price for soldiers, but I also cannot afford to just treat people randomly for free either. So I am trying to currently collect money. If anybody is interested in donating a treatment or two or something for a soldier, please look at the show notes and please feel free to reach out and contact me. And again, if anyone has a current charitable organization or event or something that they are collecting for, please reach out to me. I am happy to help you promote that. So I would like to wish everybody a Shabbat Shalom. Again, as we say weekly, I hope that this war will soon be coming to an end. Our soldiers will come home safely and our hostages will be released and come home to their families. Shabbat Shalom, everyone.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here with you.
Thank you so much.
I mean, ADHD, this is like a topic that plagues every room. You can't go anywhere today without hearing at least one person in every family has been diagnosed with ADHD. Now, I know it seems simple, but could you define ADHD for us just in case there's any who don't actually know what it is?
Mm-hmm. Certainly, because I think that is a very good place to begin. I think most people have some notion that they think what it is. The acronym stands for Attention Deficit Hyperactivity Disorder. What that typically means to most people is that there's some little child running around who can't sit still. And although that is true, I can tell you that with my 15 years of experience in the clinics, I can have 10 children a day come in and they're all different. It manifests completely differently for each person. And that's been part of the journey, really, in figuring out how do I work with people. Because in so many cases, for the folks I've worked with, these traditional interventions haven't worked. And I think there's some reasons for that that I know we'll be going into today. So thank you for the opportunity to be here and have this conversation.
How did you get into this? Do you have ADHD? Your kids?
No, I come from 30 years, though, of work in the field of rehabilitation counseling and psychology. And my mother taught second grade for 32 years in the same classroom. So my upbringing was in second grade and listening to the stories and learning about the children, some of whom had some significant learning problems. And I just remember one little boy one year, he couldn't learn how to read. And my mother was really worried about him because he was really struggling. And so she decided to take him to the university, which was 45 miles one way over the summer, several trips up. I was in tow with her to a teaching center at that university. And there they diagnosed him with something at that time, which wasn't well known and still, as people struggle with, was dyslexia. And so they had some ideas on what could happen to help him learn how to read. And so through that process that summer, he learned how to read. And when I came to my most recent employment setting at a university, one of my colleagues, the reason I came out was to build an institute. And one of my colleagues said, "Hey, we have some programs we're running. We've got this service we're doing at another county where we're helping children learn how to read." Well, I was intrigued. It was like, well, what is this? And it turned out it was something called neurofeedback. I had never heard of it. My department chair had never heard of it, but he was saying what great results they were getting with these children in this special school. So we investigated it. I set up a year program where we were just piloting it to see. We had faculty volunteer their time. We volunteered to learn how to do this. And over the course of the first few months, I actually had the phone start ringing because we had people volunteering, children and veterans with PTSD. It was kind of two areas I wanted to really learn about. And the phone started ringing. A mother called me, I'll never forget this. And she said, "I don't know what you've done to my neighbor's child, but he's much better behaved now. And I think my son needs your help. Can I come in and bring my son?" And I said, "Well, certainly, we're learning this though, just so you know." And that was 15 years ago. And I've often said the phone hasn't stopped ringing since in this region. And I really decided that I needed to get the information out, which is why I wrote the book. So kind of a long story there for your listeners, but that's really the foundation of how this all came about. It was just a natural evolution.
Well, no, I think that's great because I think it's always important to get the backstory because that's usually what will make people passionate about what they're doing. So I find I always like the backstory. So that was great.
Thank
That
you.
was great. Thank you. And what do you think of medication? Do you think these kids need to be medicated while they're learning?
Oh, it's such a mixed bag. That's such a tough question for people. We have a lot of struggles of parents over here in the US because the schools for children who are kind of quote, misbehaving, and I know we're going to be able to define that here in a little bit.
Yeah.
The schools push parents, and they're not supposed to do this. It is not legal to tell parents to put their children on medication, but parents are pressured in some settings over here to put their child on medications, or they're going to, be expelled from the school in some cases. Now, some children who are not acting out, of course, that may not come up, but there's a lot going on here. So medication, I think it's very important we understand what the purpose of it is. Because it is not designed to treat the underlying causal factors, to remedy and resolve it permanently. Medication in this case gets rid of some of the symptoms as long as the medication is in the child's body. When it wears off, then the symptoms come back that day, sometimes more by the time the child gets home. So the children then are acting out more at home, but they've been able to contain it at school. So it doesn't, in my opinion, so I can only deal with and talk about the folks who've shown up in my clinic, and obviously I haven't treated everyone on the planet, but the folks that have come in are the ones that fall in one of two camps. They've been down the medication route. Either it worked for a while, it stopped working, or there were side effects, or the child refused to take the meds. So there's kind of a theme there. The other camp are parents who don't want to go down that route and are looking for the alternatives that get at the root cause. And that's really the essence of what my book is about, is let's get to the root cause. Let's not just put the Band-Aid of the medication on top of the wound and say we've treated this and we're all good to go, because it doesn't typically solve the problem, at least for those that I have worked with.
So can we talk a little bit about what the root cause is? And I imagine it may not be exactly the same for every person.
Oh, it isn't. And that's the challenge for most people is that, as I said, 10 children can walk in a day, and they're all 10 going to have their own profile, if you will, their own areas of strength and their own areas that aren't working well for them in processing auditory and visual information. And that's what I really discovered needs to get down to the root cause of this, is that there's something going on here that's more than just the behavior. And so often in our world, we're just focused on the superficial, let's get rid of the behaviors and everything's going to be okay then mentality. It's, I'm going to say it, let's take a pill in this case and it's all going to be well. It can happen. And certainly I think for some folks it has. There are a lot for whom it hasn't. And those are the ones where things are falling apart and they're looking for something else. And when I run this assessment that we use in conjunction with the intervention that we run, we're able to get at this in about 30 minutes. So it's a computer-based assessment. I'm looking at 37 areas of auditory and visual processing across those markers. We're looking at memory, conceptualization, and sequencing. And when we get done with that, there's a 15-page report that I go over at the time of that intake with the parents. And this applies to adults too. So I don't want people to feel like they only have to be under the age of 18. I work with people in their 50s and 60s who are struggling with this the same as children are. So this assessment, though, will get to the root cause of what's going on. So here we then have the hardcore data from this very well validated and used assessment that's been around for close to 20 years. And that then eases parents' minds because now they have very specific information. And so there's 37 areas and all 37 are assessed. And I can tell you within that period of time, this is where the trouble lies. And then I'll read this assessment to them and the results that we get. I've been with the parents while the child's been in another room taking the assessment. And I will start reading sometimes the exact verbiage that parents have just shared with me. Only we now know what category this falls in, and we have something we can call it so that we have a common language. And we can say, this child's processing speed is much slower than it should be, which is why your child looks like they are, quote, slow in the classroom. But that doesn't mean this is a cognitive problem or a developmental delay. It simply means that the information that is being provided, the child can't keep up with it. as it's coming at them. And with that, then they're lost and confused. And some children will act out when they're feeling lost and confused. Others just withdraw. And that's one of the 37 areas that we look at.
And let's say is it that people will often show symptoms or in multiple, I assume, of the 37 areas rather than just one, correct?
Absolutely. It's typical of those 37. It's interesting over the years because some people are great in auditory, but their visual processing is just really, really weak across those markers. Other people, it's the flip side of the coin. So they may be very strong with visual, and this is where we get the terms visual learner or auditory learner, I believe. Okay. I think what's underneath all of that is what this is. Because I think we have learned, okay, play to the strength without really understanding that this other could be strengthened to give you that as well. And then most people are going to have a combination of some of that. And in the book, I actually offer up data of children who don't have any processing. And these children are in serious trouble in the school because they're not able to learn at all. And these are the children that are getting funneled into very heavy support services in schools, which they should be. But typically it's not the right support services, because if you don't know what you're dealing with, how can you provide the right intervention if you don't know what this is? If you just think you're dealing with a child who's cognitively delayed, when in fact, this child can't process auditory or visual information. And we've had this happen. So we tackle this. It's going to take a minute when you're dealing with both and we're wiring it in. But imagine what it's like for that child to suddenly be able to start remembering what's being said, to be able to learn, and to be able to start thriving in school where they haven't had any success before.
Can you give me some example of what you would do, say, for that specific child? Like what type of learning it is or what you're actually doing with them, just as like an example?
Well, what I do in my clinics is called EEG biofeedback, which is called neurofeedback in certain terms. And that's brain training. So what's happening is the brain is learning through feedback, like biofeedback. So you can see how your brain's working with information. And we have what look like, we call them video games, but they're training programs that actually, through the repetition of 20 times of these training programs, targeting those areas, the brain learns how to function better. So it's not anything being administered to this person. We're measuring brain waves so that this person can see what's working and isn't working on the screen. And that then runs the programs. And so if you're manufacturing attention or memory or whatever it is that you're training on, then you start winning these programs. So there's a reward built in for that, which is that positive reinforcement. It's like, oh, I want to win my game. It's like, okay, to win your game, then you're going to have to really allow your brain to work here. That's not anything you're going to think it through. So just allow your brain, just move into this, just let this happen, because your brain is going to figure this out. It's kind of like riding a bike. People can show you how to ride a bike. They can tell you how to ride a bike. You can watch videos on how to ride a bike. The only way to ride a bike and learn how to do it is to get on the bike, because your brain figures out how to keep you upright. And the first time you're going to fall over. The second time you might fall over the other way. The third time you might fall again. But it doesn't take long for your brain to get the hang of how to keep you upright on a bicycle. Now, you didn't think your way through that. Your brain actually figured that out. And that's the beauty of neuroplasticity. That's the beauty of our brain and how we learn. And then by reinforcing that, you become a stronger and stronger bike rider until pretty soon you're really good at it. And that's what this does. And then it tends to halt. And the case in point is, if you haven't ridden a bike in 20 years, you can still get back on that bike and figure out how to stay upright. You don't start over. So that's the beauty of this. And then it tends to hold. So generally speaking, most people need about 20 hours of brain training. And with that, we've had children reduce the amount of medication they need to be on, get off of it, stay off of it, not get on it, whatever the case might be. And the same with adults. So we tackle that with all ages.
Well, that's a really interesting concept. I mean, 20 hours is really not that much in the scheme of things. That's really not bad at all.
It isn't. We do it in 30-minute segments 2 or 3 times a week. We want people to have a break in between. It's like going to the gym.
Right.
So you go to the gym, you train. The good news is you don't have to keep coming back to our gym, though. We love our clients, but we want you to come in, get this tackled, and go on and have a great life.
Do you think, do you see a difference? Like you said, you've been doing this for over 20, 30 years. Do you see a difference before COVID and after COVID? Are you seeing a huge difference?
Oh, yes. There's a lot more anxiety. There's a lot more of the amygdala system that's been fired off in children and adults. Trauma, we're seeing more complex trauma come in. We're seeing a lot more panic disorders, isolation syndromes of people not wanting to get out of their home. They're still frightened. There's a lot. We have a lot with teenagers that are really struggling with socialization. And we have a lot of, primary grade children who, it's hard to believe it's been 4 years ago that this all went down, and we are still digging out. I think we're going to be digging out for a while because these patterns got hardwired in. So we really spent 2 years in a very big state of fear around the planet, and that's hardwiring fear into people's brains. And when that happens, it becomes and can become what we call a complex PTSD situation and response pattern. So some people had good resilience for that. Other people were unprepared for that kind of fear. And it just became so locked in and so hardwired in that we're now treating a lot of PTSD in children and teenagers. And there's a remedy for this. So we treat trauma the same as we treat ADHD. I've been doing this since the get-go of 15 years. And the good news is we can rewire that amygdala system. We can get that calmed down. I started with veterans, and the language I used with them 15 years ago is, when you were in the military, you had to have that amygdala system on full alert 24/7 in a lot of cases, where you had to do that in order to survive. You came back. The problem is that off switch is missing now. And so what we need to do is reinstall that off switch in that system, because you don't need that on 24/7. It's going to wear you out. And so let's get the off switch back in so that when you need it, you've got it, but you don't need it at 2:00 in the morning typically. You need to sleep then.
Do you work only in your clinics, or can you do some of this stuff over Zoom with people?
We do it over Zoom as well. Mm-hmm.
Okay, I'm asking because I know that we're in the middle of a war over here in Israel, right?
I know.
And I know one of my friend's husbands, he's had PTSD for years because he had trauma from 20 years ago in the army, and he was fighting, he wasn't in Gaza, but he was in another not great area for a few months. And she tells me now that he has severe PTSD. And I said to her, I'm like, well, why get him out of the army? I'm like, why is he's way over the age where he has to be in the army. Why is he still in the army? And she said, no, he actually functions better when he's in the army. It's worse when he's out of the army. And it almost sounds like exactly what you're saying, because in the army, he's got to be on full alert all the time. I mean, it literally sounds exactly like what you're saying, and that, Okay, so that was why I asked if you do this over Zoom. I have your information I'd like to give to somebody, but we'll talk about that later. So
okay. Yes, and this is for your listeners. It's really important for people to know that there's help available for PTSD, and a lot of people around the globe have been affected in the recent years. I mean, certainly there was a lot of people affected prior to the pandemic, but anytime where you have wars going on and military folks and families that are dealing with these situations on a longer term basis, that all gets hardwired in. And to override that is really challenging on the individual to be able to catch the trigger and then be able to do something about it, because you're triggered. And so when you're triggered, you can't use these other resources. that might be available. So we have to get the triggering mechanism calmed down.
Yeah, it's really fascinating to me. I'm a physical therapist and I work a lot with motor control. And to me, that's the same thing. It's retraining. I'm always explaining to people, it's not just that we're strengthening a muscle. Often the brain is giving a message to one muscle, but it's going to a bunch of different muscles. And we have to make the brain relearn these patterns because you've created faulty movement patterns that are often causing pain and things like that. So it's really, really interesting to me. So
Yes.
do you think that people today are overdiagnosed with ADHD? Like, do you get people coming in who you don't feel like it's ADHD, but maybe you can help them anyway? Let's say it's dyslexia or other thing.
Oh, absolutely. So people have come in diagnosed with so many different conditions. Autism is one that is frequently bandied about. If a child isn't processing well. Tourette's syndrome, we've had people with that. My least favorite diagnosis for children is intermittent explosive disorder.
I've never even heard that. Wow.
Yes, that one shows up. Um, Obsessive compulsive, so OCD, so panic disorders, sleep disorders. There's a lot that this affects in life, a lot of anxiety, of course, depression and PTSD. But the key I always start with, and people will say, do I need to have a diagnosis when I come to you? And I said, no, you don't. And I'm not real big on diagnoses, period. So I will say, I'm not going to be diagnosing you. We're simply going to find out what's underneath all of these diagnoses, all of the behaviors. We're going to see, is this an auditory and a visual processing challenge? And so if it is, then there's something, yes, we can do about that. And guess what? You're just going to train your brain. So you're going to learn how to strengthen these areas of your brain as you're getting feedback on the computer on how to do this. And we're with the person. So whether you're in person or remote, we run it the same. It's just via Zoom. So we have cameras positioned so we can see things a little bit better. And then we run the sessions from the clinics. So there's a little more setup on the front end because we have to do the technology piece individually for each person. But we've had really good results with that as well.
Well, I love that because I'm the same way. I'm always like, I'm not diagnosing you. I don't care. I don't need to see the MRI. Let's see what your body can do. Let's see what it's not doing that it should be doing and what it's doing too much of that it shouldn't be. And if we change that, you're going to feel better, So I really love that. That absolutely resonates with me. It resonates with me.
And, some people want a label and I'll say, okay, here's what this is. This is auditory prudence.
Yeah.
You can call it that if you want to call it that.
Right.
Okay. You've got you have slow processing speed over here on auditory. You want to call it something, call it that. Because we don't need any other labels here. They don't work in this case. But some people need the explanation, which I understand. I get that.
Oh, I'm all about that. When people understand things, I think that they tend to do them better. If you're going to tell me to do something and you don't tell me why, I'm not going to do it. You know what I mean? I'm not so big on that. So, and do you feel that when people have this label of ADHD or any label you want to give them, that they use it as often? I feel like the way people are diagnosed today, and maybe the diagnosis, like you're saying, for you, it doesn't even matter the diagnosis. But, I know when I was growing up, I'm turning 55. So people weren't diagnosed, there was one or two kids that were diagnosed with hyperactivity, or something like that may have had some type of medication they were on. And I definitely had some form of ADD, ADHD, but you didn't diagnose back then. So I was always just told, Dara doesn't live up to her potential. She's really smart. She's only getting a C, but I didn't even know how to study. You know what I mean? So, but I almost feel like by labeling people, we give them this excuse, for the rest of their life, they can be, oh, I have ADHD. And they put things off. And I'm just wondering what you feel about that.
Well, I do think there's a piece of that. And what I've run into recently in some of these teenagers that are showing up in my clinic is they're coming in self-diagnosed. Oh, well, I have this or this. And I'm thinking, I had one young gal come in the other day that was particularly Dedicated to to having a diagnosis. And so she had thought she had autism. And so the parents had taken her to a psychiatrist, and the psychiatrist says, "You have no markers of this whatsoever." And she was so angry because she wanted a diagnosis of autism. It's like, well, you don't have it. Then she shows up in my office, and someone had told her she has ADHD. And so I run my assessment, and there's a potential for that. The assessments will say some diagnostic considerations. Well, she didn't have enough of a marker on that to even come to the diagnostic consideration of ADHD, but she did have findings. And I said, well, you do have some areas here, but you don't meet the criteria of ADHD. She says, I know I have ADHD. And just kind of looked at her dad. And it was just like, well, how about if we focus on what we can do here? And I would far rather channel people into thinking about, well, what can I do versus what I can't do? Because can't is a real, where do you go with that? That you're just kind of giving up. And I don't want people to give up. I want them to know that there's hope. There's a way they can reach their goals and things that they want to do without getting so locked into, I have this or I am this. And it's when they're using the I am, it's like, let's be careful with that. We don't want to go there. You have some areas that your brain could get strengthened in, just like your body could if you went to the gym and got an assessment there. There would be ways we could strengthen your body, and that's what we're going to do here. We're going to strengthen your brain.
Is there anybody who would who would pass all 37 areas? Like, I imagine that this could be helpful for anybody because nobody's perfect. So meaning these parents who want their kids to go to Harvard and Princeton and, maybe these schools, I imagine that anybody strengthening their brain is going to give them an advantage. And this would be helpful for anybody.
It really is. And so we actually do some academic enhancement protocols with some folks. And there are people who don't have big findings across the auditory and the visual. I've had Major League ball player come in. I've had a gymnast come in. So we've actually helped them tune up their focus and concentration. They didn't really have anything pinging over there. There wasn't a lot of anxiety or anything going on. But they felt like, I think I can improve a little bit here, and this might give me an edge. And so a lot of sports teams actually are using neurofeedback. It's not always talked about, but a lot of sports teams have figured out that you can help people train in on your concentration and your focus, memory as well, and really see a change in the performance there. So it's not all ends. I work with senior citizens who want to ward off, cognitive decline. So we've done that. And our youngest has been 3, and our oldest has been 93. Mm-hmm.
Oh my gosh. Wow. Okay. That's, yeah. So because they do say that cognitive, the sort of cognitive problems, anybody who wants to ward off dementia and, Alzheimer's, this sounds like definitely like a way to keep you sharp.
And, it is.
And do you have some sort of app or something online? Because like you said, that you don't want people coming to you forever, right? But I feel like everybody could play brain games consistently, you know what I mean, to continue to improve. So do you guys work with some type of homework that people do at home, or is it just in the clinic with you, or?
I think there are some apps out there. I'm always a little cautious about some of them. There's a lot out there, honestly. And anything that we do in a repetitive manner is going to help train our brain. What I'm doing is kind of digging in with the folks who are really having difficulty that maybe they don't see a lot of benefit from that because it's not necessarily what that game is geared to do. So those apps are geared for certain things, and you really have to look at that. There was one group that was out several years ago that ended up in a lot of trouble because they were making a lot of claims for their subscription that was out there. And then when there was an investigation held, they didn't have the data behind it. And they actually were fined, I think, a few $1 million.
Oh, wow.
For really misrepresenting the programs and what it can do. So it doesn't mean you can't get benefit. You just have to know what it's capable of delivering. And if you have these kinds of challenges, you're not going to get to that through these other programs. but it doesn't mean you can't improve your concentration and your memory. So you very well might be able to do that with some of these. There's nothing wrong with that. It's just if you have these other things that are kind of trailing along and you're not quite feeling where you need to get to, then this type of an assessment and this type of program might be the next step for you. So you could think about that.
And with your program, do people need to do homework? Like, do you give them homework to do at home in between sessions?
Not so much, because we're doing 2 or 3 times a week, every 30-minute sessions. And the good news with that is, well, with parents, I'll actually give them tips. And I can give them tips for the school, the classroom as well. Because if we're able to figure out, okay, we've got auditory weakness here, we've got visual weakness over here, here's some tips for what you can do to shore up the auditory responses and give your child some relief or some visual. Because if you can figure out what's working and what isn't working, and then play to the strengths but support the areas of weakness while they're getting trained, then that does alleviate some of the stress in the classroom. I write accommodation letters for parents when they're advocating for IEP, which is individualized education plans, or 504s over here. So I take those findings and write these recommendation letters for parents. I've worked with some attorneys in being able to advocate in some ways for some additional support in the classroom for children. And it isn't rocket science, but if you don't know what you're dealing with, you've got a child who just isn't doing well in the classroom, how do you know what it is? Is it auditory? Is it visual? Is it a combination of both? And if you think it's one thing and you're introducing that intervention, but it's actually something else and the intervention isn't working, then it's a misfit. And so it's not hitting in the right area for the intervention to work. And therein lies so much of the conflict between parents and teachers and the child, is that they're implementing these interventions and they're not working. And so then the blame game kind of gets kicked in sometimes, where they kind of blame the child for not following through. The parents kind of say the school isn't doing this, the school is saying the parents aren't doing this, and everyone's in a no-win situation. This turns all of that around. Everyone wins with this.
That's great. And can you tell me a little bit more about the book?
Sure. I love talking about the book. So I really put that out once we had the ability to do the telehealth options, and that came about as part of the pandemic. So I will say there are some good things that came out of that situation. And so part of what happened is I had contacted the software developer when we were looking at another shutdown out here. And I just said, the first one I had suicidal children, we had to keep running. We did keep running. So, but this is only good for people who can drive in, and they have to be like 20 or 30 minutes from my clinics to be able to do this. We need some options out here. And so about a month later, he called me and he said, I've created an option for you. And so we've been able to do that. And once I had that, I decided, okay, I can write the book now, because what I didn't want to do was put a book out and say, okay, these are all the things that aren't working and here's some good tips, and then not have a true solution for people. And so this is the true solution, is available through telehealth if people want to, pick up on that. And so that's really the essence of the book. Is I brought in a lot of case studies. So everything in there is stories about children that we've worked with. Obviously, I've changed details and the names and, all of that. So everything's fine. But it does, I think, help people understand what children are struggling with and why things work and don't work for them. And to me, if we can get this message out of, being on shows like this is so helpful, so that parents can figure out there's something else going on here. You can get to this book. It's on my website. It's available online. It's in paperback. It's in ebook. I did the audiobook myself. And with that, you enter your code into the computer or the website, and you can download the supplemental materials for the audiobook. You need the visuals with this, because there are a lot of graphs in there that really show the pre and the post intervention with children with stories. So there's a book chapter on auditory. There's a chapter on visual, and then there's the chapter on the combined. And I talk about neurofeedback and what it is. And I talk about the brain and how the brain really can be harnessed to help children and adults improve their quality of life. And that's what this is all about, is let's get this taken care of so people can have a good life. And that's what the book's for.
I like it. That's great. And are you educating, like, are you teaching or training other people to be trained in this method that you're using? Meaning, I get that it's neurofeedback, but you've clearly gone beyond that and created your own,
Yeah. We've got a few things we've done ourselves within the clinic and how we are working with people. And that actually is very much on the forefront of my mind, because when I did the pilot project in the elementary school before the pandemic, which, gosh, now I'm thinking, gosh, that was 5 years ago. When we did that, time has flown. What was so amazing about this and getting this into the school is we had a school psychologist who ended up doing her dissertation on this and finishing it during the pandemic. So we pulled it off. And she actually was able to get the school board, because she was well respected in that school. She got the school board on board. She got the teachers on board. She got the administrators on board. And then she brought me in and said, let's pitch this. And then my employer, my dean at that time, he was interim and he was so wonderful. I pitched this to him and we put in a proposal and he helped fund it. So we got about $14,000 to be able to set that up and take care of that and project. And with that, I was able to go in. We worked with parents, we worked with teachers, the administrators, with the goal of, if we do this in-house, can we change up how the elementary school is working with these children? And we did, because we were able to have the parents and the teacher. There was one case where we had the teacher in the classroom or in the assessment results. And I watched his face as I started going over these results. And this was a little boy. It was a male elementary school teacher. And I could see the change go across this teacher's face when he started really understanding what was going on with this little boy. And this wasn't willful bad behaviors. This little boy couldn't hang on to what he was being told in the classroom. So he couldn't hang on to it. So can we affect these changes? Yes. And what about if we get more people trained? What if, I'm able to harness a group of school psychologists who might want to get trained on this, to where we could get this embedded in schools? And I guarantee you, I will put my own money on this, that if we could get this into schools, I will improve the budget for special education within a year. We will have a major effect on that, because these children will figure out what they really need. We'll get the brain trained up. And then once the brain's trained, they're good to go. And then the interventions that the school is providing are going to be much less expensive than the ones that they're throwing at this right now when they don't know what they're tackling.
Right. We have a very, very good special education system over here, where the kids have, instead of 35 kids in a class, you'll be in a class of, let's say in high school, up to 14, in elementary school, up to 10 with a special education teacher. And it's done but they give them like music therapy and art therapy. They give them all of these other things. But you're right. It seems like if you would have this where there's 10 kids and each kid was getting, 2 or 3 times a week, the specific thing they needed, the impact you could have by the end of the year is just.
It's huge.
Yeah.
It was huge. We had just a tiny little pilot study running. And at the end of it, we got interrupted halfway through, but even the halfway mark, the administrator, the principal, was going, we're having a lot less incidences in the classroom. These children aren't showing up in my office as much. The parents are going, wow, they're following through at home. They're doing their homework. The battle is ending. And it's like, yes, imagine if we would have been able to, finish all of that. I'm telling you, this is beyond a shadow of a doubt. It's, I think, the most important thing I've done in my entire life, which is really trying to get the message out that we have alternatives here, and these can lead to lasting outcomes that for a small amount of investment on the front end. And I can only imagine what we could do if we could come in over there in those schools and have a pilot project over there. And let's see what happens. I think we could have a good time.
Do you recommend any sort of, change in diet or anything like that? Because that's such a big thing. Is that a piece of what you do, or?
Well, I'm not a dietitian, but I do have common sense. and, and a lot of parents do too. So
Right.
they've done a lot of trial and error, and they have figured out that a lot of sugar sometimes for some children isn't such a good thing. They've also figured out that a lot of these processed foods with a lot of chemicals in them, that their children have some reactions if they've had a lot of that. So, I really do. I ask about, what they're doing, what they're eating. I ask about, food restrictions because I kind of want to know, what's happened within the family here, what's being paid attention to. Some parents, I think, like in these situations, can go a little too far. Others don't go far enough. And so we try to find the balance in there of really, what's best for this child. And I find most parents are receptive to that because they really do want their child to do well. And if
Right.
they haven't thought about this, then having the conversation is a great starter. It's like, okay, let's take a look at this and see what we can do.
What does spirituality mean to you? That's a little out of left
Oh,
field after what we were talking about, but
well, it may seem like left field, but it's part and parcel to who I am and how I've done everything. Because I think without grounding and without understanding bigger picture, we're left to the winds of change that blow through our lives, and that can lead us to being pretty worn out and exhausted. And if we don't have a way to kind of ground and be centered in who we are and what our goals are and what we want to accomplish. And so that's a very deep part of me and always has been. So I don't think in childhood I really knew what to call it. I think it took later on in life to kind of give it a name, I guess. But it's really a way of living. And so it's, how do you go through this? I'm human. I'm going to have my foibles and my little kerfluffles here and there like everybody does. But at the end of the day, what's the bigger picture here? Am I on my mission? And I am very clear about that. I am. And that's why being here today, I think, is such an integral part of this, is to get the message out and around the globe about what we can do now. And let's not give up hope, because that, to me, is what everything is about, is, let's figure it out. We've got a lot of resources available to us these days. And let's figure out how we can pull it all together and make a difference in the world for people and for the world itself. I really think about teenagers who are dropping out of school because they didn't learn how to read, kind of back to the throes of, my younger years. And we have these children ending up in juvenile detention halls in really bad situations. And what if we could actually change that by getting into these elementary schools and helping those children who couldn't learn how to read, learn how to read? What if we can get these third graders reading on grade level by the end of third grade? Because when they move into fourth grade and beyond, they're having to read to learn. And so if you can't read, your learning is going to be impacted. Maybe we have a solution for a big chunk of that. And what would that do in our world?
that is powerful. And I agree with you. That's a really powerful message. Thank you so much for that. And where can people find you? I'm sure there's going to be a lot of people interested in finding you, because I don't know. I think, like I said, every family's got one with ADHD, if not more than one.
Yes. So I'm on my website. So it's www.Connie McReynolds, ConnieMcReynolds.com. And I'm always tweaking that website. So the book's up there. Podcasts are listed there. So you will be up. This podcast will be up when it goes. There's a contact me. There's a way to sign up for a newsletter I'm kind of new in creating that, but it does give people an opportunity to get the first 3 chapters of my book for free for signing up to that. And I promise I don't blast you with a lot of newsletters. So there's also a free brief assessment for people who just want to stick their big toe in the pool. So you can click on that, get the downloaded PDF for that, just as a starting point. But the book and those chapters later on will really reveal the auditory and the visual processing challenges. So that's on there. I actually have some video clips. Talks about neurofeedback, a young man who's a teenager that talks about his journey with neurofeedback. He wasn't my client, but he is here from this region of where I live. And testimonials. There's my research articles from when I was in academia. And obviously the book link is up there, so you can click on that, and there's lots of ways. And so the newsletter, you can get that. If you want to contact me, just fill in the contact me form. It comes straight to me. Put a little bit of information in there, and I tend to prefer either a call, a phone call, or a Zoom call, particularly for international folks. Zoom works very well, so that I can answer questions. And I do 15, 20-minute consult there for no charge for people to just, is this something that they might be able to benefit from?
Well, that's really great. Thank you so, so much for that. And thank you so much for coming on today. I really appreciate it. Been a pleasure hearing from you.
Oh, thanks for having me. It was great. I love being here.
Hey, everyone. So we are so lucky to have with us today Avigayil Gimpel. Avigayil is a mother of 6 amazing kids, most of whom are diagnosed with ADHD. She is a special educator, a college lecturer, and author. Noticing the lack of understanding and quality intervention programs for ADHD, she wrote 2 books. Hyper Healing, offering a comprehensive intervention plan, while Hyper Healing, Show Me the Science, helps parents make informed decisions. Avigayil is a tireless advocate for children. So first of all, thank you so much for agreeing to do this, because we're having Avigayil. She could have done the expert interview, but she's with us to talk about Torah today and about how this really ties into this field that she has been. It actually doesn't say here how many years. How many years are you working in the ADHD field?
30.
Oh my gosh!
30.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
I just aged myself. Yeah.
Yeah. But look at her. She does not look her age. And I've known Avigayil's husband. I don't think I've ever told her or her husband the story, but her husband is from Atlanta, Georgia, Danny, and that's where I'm from. And I remember meeting Danny. I must have been in 9th grade, and I think he's a year younger than me. And for some reason, I don't know why I would be taking a course in school in the summer. Like, that was very much not like me. I was never a school person. I don't know. But we were in some course together and we sat next to each other. So I remember meeting him. It must have been in like 9th grade or something like that. And then my family moved to Israel. And then that was it. I never heard of the Gimpels again.
So let me ask you, Dara,
Yes.
was he able to sit back then in 9th grade?
You know what? I wasn't. I also for sure had ADHD, and who was diagnosing that back then? Do you know what I mean? So
That's right.
No, we were probably talking to each other in the classroom. I don't know what we were doing in a classroom. Like, it wasn't like school, because I don't think he went to Yeshiva High School. And this was something going on.
He
Did
came
he go
to
to Yeshiva?
8th grade. He was in public school, and he apparently he failed math that year, and he had to take math to pass the year.
So then could it be that we were in math together?
Were you in math together?
Maybe. There was
He
something.
swears that that's what turned him around, and then he became a straight A student and the school president, and it was that summer. So you were sitting right
That's
next
so
to
funny. And
that
for the
middle
life
summer.
of me, I don't know why I would have been in summer school. Maybe
I'll
I
ask
failed
him.
math and I don't even remember that. No, I'm sure he'd ask him because I don't even think he remembers. But anyways, the next I heard of the Gimpels was they made Sheva Brachot for my husband and I. And apparently they had moved to Israel and my parents were friends with them, and Jeremy's friends with Ellie, and that was it. That was all history. So anyways,
That's right.
that's our getting to know a story. Anyways, back to the subject at hand. I would love to hear some of your insights on ADHD and Torah and
Where do we begin?
Oh my gosh.
I've got loads of insights. I feel like ADHD and Torah are so intertwined with each other that you can't really separate them. And my journey really began with like an understanding of the way God created this world and how we are supposed to be working with that natural flow of God's creation and not against it. And then like really looking into the story of our vote of our forefathers and foremothers, and seeing that like they really give us a lot of guidance as to how we're supposed to be living our life and raising our kids. So what do you suggest? Where do we go first?
I am going to let you take the lead on this. I mean, I guess if we're talking about our Avot and Imahot, I guess we must be starting with Abraham and Sarah. Unless we're going back to Adam and Chava, I don't know. Like,
so I feel like with ADHD, where I've gotten caught in the past, is I started not as a mom of kids with ADHD and a wife of a wonderful husband with ADHD. I started in the classroom, and I have a sense that that's probably why I liked my husband so much when I met him, because he was like as off the wall as my students were. And I taught boys, so I was just like, oh my God, I know this kind of kid. Anyway, so from there on, you know, he clearly spread his genes to the gang. And ADHD is not only genetic, important to know. But what I saw from the beginning is that even if we just start at the creation of the world, ADHD seems to be, from the world perspective, from the medical perspective, very much like one of these like quick fix. You like, you know, you see a list of symptoms, you diagnose, you give a pill, fix the problem. And A, it doesn't fix the problem. And B, that's just not the way we work. That's not the way our brains work. We're meant to be in process all the time. We're meant to be curious. We're meant to be figuring out what's going on, underlying causes for ADHD symptoms. And we see that at the very beginning of the Torah with just the way God created the world. He could have gone like that. Okay, the world's being created. But he doesn't do that. He takes 7 days and lists, he did this and then he did that. And then he looked back at it and said, that's really good. I love the way God pats himself on the back, by the way. It's one of my favorite parts of the Torah. Like, well done. And I say to people all the time, compliment yourself. We got to learn from God. But so that's just the beginning part. But for me, the exciting story that really jumps out at me is Yaakov Esav's story, where we have these two completely different life views, where Esav is like, you know, when I imagine him being born, I imagine him being like all the teeth and the hair. Like I imagine with chest hair already, you know, like he pops out and jumps right off of the delivery table. And he's like this little man ready to start life. And Yaakov's a baby, like most people are born. But you look through Esav's life and he's that quick fix guy. He wants the instant gratification. He wants everything now and fun and quick. He kills the animals and eats them. He's not shepherding them. He's not raising them. He takes the women. He takes the soup, dumps it down his throat. You know, sells his birthright without thinking twice. So he's that quick fix guy. And then you see Yaakov. He works 7 years for the one wife and then 7 years for the other wife. And he waits and he travels and he starts from zero and builds up to be wealthy. Nothing happens instantly. And the drama of the two brothers meeting up, Yaakov and Esav, and Esav, but you know, we're terrified. Oh my God, he's going to kill him. But in the end, he's like, come be my neighbor. I imagine again, him like jumping up and down. Come, let's go next door to each other. Okay, I'm a little bit energetic myself. Anyway, so, and Yaakov says to him, no, you go ahead. You go to Har Seir. I'll get there. You know, and then Rashi jumps in and says, well, when's he going to get there? He's going to get there, Yemot HaMashiach. He'll get there, meaning that what Yaakov is saying to us as his children is we are on a journey, and it's not about the end result, kids sitting in classroom. It's about growth. learning, curiosity, learning new things, finding out new things, making relationships, building habits and skills. That's what it's about. So as a Jewish woman and a mother of children that I'm putting in a Jewish education system, what's most important to me is to look at where the kid is today, what's going on for him, find out why that thing is going on for him. Is it diet? Is it sleep? Is it trauma? Is it instant gratification personality? Is it screen addiction? There's so many reasons that child might not be flourishing. Start with curiosity and then go on a journey with the child and their parents, and hopefully the teachers as well. So what we were talking about is the many different causes of ADHD symptoms. Obviously, we don't know all of them, and we're all learning on the job. Two that are really pretty dominant are a gut dysbiosis. There's something wrong with the child's health, and also trauma. And trauma really comes up a lot right now because our entire nation is traumatized. So I want to just kind of look at both of those from more of a Torah perspective and see if we can really tap into what's going on for adults and for children. But I tend to work more with adults for their children. So let's see what we can talk about with that. So when I do an intake with parents, they come to me with their child with ADHD symptoms. Usually they're referred obviously by the teacher. That's 90% of the time. And I see that the child has not only the ADHD symptoms, but also physiological symptoms: runny nose, rashes, asthma, allergies, autoimmunity. Some have, for some reason, it's all with A's, and people don't really put that together, or they'll just say it's a comorbid situation. The kid doesn't sit in class and also happens to have, anaphylactic allergies, and I thought that way for many years as well. But then it turns out that with a lot of excellent teachers and therapists and doctors that I was able to tap into, I found out that actually the gut, being the center of our body, is our second brain. And when we have a healthy gut, our brain hums and it works great. So what I started doing is putting kids that have a gut dysbiosis, that have these physiological symptoms, onto special diets to really cleanse their gut. And over and over again, it worked. As a matter of fact, I have two sons with that had autoimmune conditions. They both had celiac, and we were able to completely heal the celiac with a deep 2-month cleanse. It's absolutely miraculous, and I'm always pleased to help people walk through that and just get rid of this terrible condition. But what does that have to do with the Torah? And we see over and over again in the Torah, one obvious place is v'chai, that we're supposed to live through the mitzvot. And when we're sending our kids to school to learn Torah, to learn how to do mitzvot, we're sending them to be vibrant in the Torah and the mitzvot. And then we're drugging them to make sure they sit so that they can learn to be vibrant while they're doing Torah and mitzvot. And that seems to be the opposite way. Our body is not there to carry around our brain. Our body and brain need to be in synthesis with each other, and we are commanded to keep our body healthy. We are commanded to keep, and we have so many laws, kashrut laws, that people look back into and analyze, and they say, my God, these laws are actually laws of health that make the Jewish body healthier. And we hear that wrapping our arms in tefillin, there was a scientific study that came out about wrapping our arm in tefillin that really restricts blood flow for about half an hour. You know this one?
No, but I'm loving it because there's an episode coming up on blood flow restriction training.
There we go.
It's
so
amazing.
We've been doing it for thousands of years, and Jewish male hearts are much stronger. So what we...
And it's the last storm usually for those people.
Exactly.
Amazing.
What we have to understand is that when we are working with our child, we're not trying to sledgehammer the child into focus and concentration. We need to understand that v'chai b'hem means look at your child and figure out how to make your child's body flourish in order for their soul and their mind and their connection with God to flourish as well. So that's extremely important to me and very close to my heart. So my kids seem to be so special that they want to make sure that I have every experience. And that's why they gifted me with celiac. God bless them.
And do you think, in other words, exactly what you were saying earlier, that v'chai behem means you have to look at each one, though, as an individual. So each one may need something different, and each one may need, whatever it is they need. And it's functional medicine, and it's root cause, and it's not, treating everyone exactly the same, and one pill for all and all for one.
And I'll tell you where we have that. First of all, we know that's chanoch lanara pidarko, that we're educating each child according to his way, and therefore he'll stick with it afterwards. That's the end of the sentence. But we also know as Jews that we're not the children of one person. It's not a religion with one leader. We spread out into 12 different streams, and we're not all supposed to be the same. And that's the problem, because in a school setting, what's the most highly valued is being able to sit and focus for a long time. But what about energy, curiosity, and being able to build, to touch? And those kids with a completely different, healthy skill set, they're a different shevet. They're a different shevet, and we need to bring out their strengths as well. Now, of course, if a kid is sitting in a classroom bouncing around and it's not working for him or her, we need to make sure that we're figuring out why and then taking that journey. The quick fix is never going to get us there. Just like Yaakov said, I'm not settling here in Har Seir with you. I have to go to Mitzrayim, suffer a whole bunch, come around, come back here, and then hopefully we will get to where we need to go. And obviously I don't prefer the suffering part, but suffering, that's what builds us. And that's something that, Rabbi Sachs actually taught me that through his Torah, not directly, although I wish, through the fact that how do we learn? How do we grow? And when I speak to the parents of these children, I say, where were your aha moments in life? Where was that moment where you said, this really changed me. This showed me a new path. It's always through our challenges, every single time. Yes. And yet we were taught to bubble wrap our children. Now that's a terrible idea. Like, how are they going to learn? How are they going to grow if we bubble wrap them? And I don't recommend it. Obviously, we want to protect them and keep them safe, which brings me to the trauma part. Because the Torah gives us the ugly stories. It's not pretty. And everyone, especially in these parshiot, story after story is heart-wrenching. Like, you want to cry when you're listening to these stories in shul at the challenge that people had to go through, the sacrifices that people had to go through. And I actually heard from Ben Shapiro once, and that's my Jewish source for this one. He's very
I like
Jewish.
it. He was just
and
here.
And a big Kiddush Hashem. Were you
I
there?
heard by the way, that you guys got to go backstage.
We did, yeah. I pulled some
heard, because I only found out much later that Evan Lowenstein is Douglas Murray's manager. But anyways,
well, that's not how we got there, by the way.
Oh, really?
We went through we went through the Ben Shapiro route. We couldn't get in touch with Evan.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So, but we did see Evan and the whole Lowenstein family, which was so nice. Anyway, and I did get to meet both Ben Shapiro and Douglas Murray, which they really are heroes. But I did hear once Ben Shapiro saying he was on some kind of podcast and he was trying to explain the sacrifice of Yitzchak, like Akedat Yitzchak, and he said something so profound, and he said, "Is there a parent who doesn't sacrifice their child on some altar?" That's part of the process. Putting your child in school is putting your kid out there and being like, good luck, develop some skills, make some friends, fall on your face, get back up again, dust yourself off, and then fall again. And just the act of having a child means you're going to land up having to sacrifice that child over and over again in this big world. Now, you better be there for that child, to be the one helping to dust off and give the hug. And we don't want to add challenges, but life is a series of incredible events. I have a grandchild, so it's like a sweet candy all the time, round the clock, just thinking about him. And then there are and there are sweet events all the time. And then there are the horrible challenges. I know three of my sons have been in combat, all year long, and it's a challenge of all challenges. Yeah. But what does the Torah teach us? And the reason I'm bringing up the trauma is because ADHD symptoms are also a trauma response. It's survival symptoms, not noticing little details, not being able to sit. Your brain is someplace else. I learned that as a child myself, going through younger childhood trauma. I learned as an adult, looking back at me, and I totally would have been medicated for ADHD, that it was the trauma I was surviving that did not allow me to really be focused and do what I was supposed to do in school. So therefore, when we see a child who's exhibiting these ADHD symptoms, especially if we have any kind of doubt that this might be a trauma response, we must never go the riddle and route, because what we're doing is shutting down the child's only ability to tell us something's wrong. And then we blame it on their brain. Oh, no, see, your brain is off, and therefore you're showing these symptoms. No, my life is off, because ADHD essentially is a clash between a healthy child and their environment, either their physical environment, their emotional environment, the fact that their personality doesn't fit with their environment. But that's really what it is, if we're going to say it in one sentence. But what does the Torah teach us about trauma is we need to receive the trauma with love as a test that we are uniquely having to go through and grow from it, not to go into a place of being a korban, of being a victim. The victim and Judaism just doesn't work together. And when I meet with clients who are going through trauma, we go away, we acknowledge the trauma, and then we try to travel away from victimhood to a place of growth, to a place of what have you learned from this? Why are you stronger? And I spoke to a little boy once who was dealing with ADHD and severe dyslexia. And he was really going through a hard time, just sitting in the classroom, so bright, and yet not being able to keep up with what was going on in the classroom. And he said to me one day, he says, I'm going to learn how to read. And when I know how to read, I'm going to be better off than everybody else around me. And I say, why is that? He says, because I will also know how to get through challenges. And this kid is in an elite commando unit today. And with all that suffering, he developed this incredible, powerful ability to function in this world in a beautiful way. So those are some of the Torah messages that I really cling on to as an expert in ADHD.
I love that. Thank you so much. Really, I love that. Everything you said just really resonates. And, the Torah is a book for all time and does tell us everything we need to know. And I love people's unique ability to be able to make that fit with what we see around us. So thank you so much.
My pleasure.
This podcast is for informational purposes only. Please seek guidance from a trusted healthcare professional. By listening to this podcast, you release Holy Health and any of our guests from all liability. I'd like to thank Joker Productions for editing this podcast.